I'm going to begin the latest installment of what in the world is going on with the Vatican with a bit of an anecdote. My family and I attend Mass on Sundays at an FSSP parish. It's a bit of a drive from where we live. I won't say what state or what diocese or who the bishop in question is because I don't want to dox ourselves and I don't want to cause any trouble and ruffle any feathers. So this past Sunday, the candidates for confirmation into Catholicism were welcomed into the church by the bishop. It is his duty to do so, and he attended Mass. I say attended because though he processed in and he did the confirmations as would be expected, he didn't actually celebrate the Mass, which seems unusual. He processed in, he did the confirmations, and he had to be coached through the whole thing because this bishop, like most bishops in the United States, and I would guess in the church around the world, are not that familiar with the traditional Latin Mass. This is obvious because, as I said, our good parish priest had to coach the bishop through every single part of things. The confirmation was done in Latin in the traditional form, and he read from the script as if the way his predecessors would have. I wouldn't have expected any of them to remember every single part of the confirmation right off the top of their head, but he did, and he read it from the script, and his Latin was almost impeccable, as if he had been trained in Latin, like every priest has been. But what was interesting is he read it, just as if it was a brick of text. He just flew through it. It was kind of awkward to watch. And then the way he had to present himself in the Mass as a guest instead of the celebrant was also awkward. The priest had to coach him through the procession, the entrance and exit processions, and through every other portion of the Mass. It is odd that the Mass today is, it is odd that the traditional form of the Mass is not at least well known to the hierarchy. In spite of the increasing interest in the Mass and the sort of hemorrhaging of parishioners in the ordinary form, one would think that bishops across the country would know the traditional Mass, at least the rubrics enough to participate in the Mass and not be awkward. I don't know if anybody else in the Mass noticed this, but I did. But then again, I'm trained to observe leadership and organizational behavior and such. So I've observed there are at least 3 types of bishops in the church today, and probably as time goes on, I'll add more to this. The first type of bishop are the types who are overtly hostile to the traditional Latin Mass. You'll know these because your diocese may not have an FSSP or an indult Mass available, or even one from the Institute of Christ the King. These are the bishops who, if you mention the traditional Mass, they will screw their face up with rage. The second type of priests, or bishops rather, are those who are indifferent to the Mass. You'll find in their dioceses indult Masses and parishes run by Fraternal Society of St. Peter and Institute of Christ the King, but the bishop doesn't really know much, if anything, about the Mass. He may be more concerned about politics or social services or fundraising or anything else. I would place the bishop that I'm talking about here in this category. And the third type of bishop are the traditionalist or neo-traditionalist or false trads, if you prefer. I won't get into that yet. Bishops. These are the bishops in the caliber of Archbishop Sample of Portland, Cardinal Raymond Burke, and Bishop Athanasius Schneider. These are advocates for and celebrate the traditional Latin Mass. And in these dioceses, you'll typically find the Latin Mass, while it may not be widely available because many priests are still not trained to do it, at least there is open advocacy for the traditional Latin Mass and typically higher standards for how the ordinary form of the Mass is celebrated. So, our first story comes from Spain, where Archbishop Sergio Castrini celebrated a Mass for Freemasons. Yes, what had one time been an excommunicable offense in more sane times now has largely flown under the radar. Castrini celebrated the Mass for Masons in recognition of the expansion of their orders of improvement and to celebrate the friendship with the Grand Lodge of Spain. To quote the Archbishop, What unites us is much bigger than what separates us. The Archbishop concluded his homily to the traditional enemies of the Church with the following kind words: God is love, and the way of knowledge is love. Love is always an answer, mainly to God who loved us first. The cross that you bring in your insignia is the sign of God's love for humanity, explained the Archbishop, who concluded his homily with a request to the Freemasons present of Christian condition. We hope that they will always continue to provide these services to society, and mainly by being faithful to the Christian principles and communion with the Church, because the Church can be different on the surface. No word from the Vatican of the automatic excommunication for prelates who ally themselves with the same organization that kicked off the Cristeros War and the associated persecutions will be enforced. Our second story comes from the Lepanto Institute and 1 Peter 5, both of which report on the efforts of a heretical group of American priests, the Association of United States Catholic Priests, or AUSCP, who are part of a larger global movement to promote modernism around the world. The AUSCP pushes for dangerous reforms to the Church, including a push for priestless parishes and the ordination of permanent deaconesses to administer those parishes, which is a clear attempt at laying the groundwork for the ordination of women despite the timeless and infallible teaching against it, as well as the modernist priestly formation in seminaries and the funneling of money from parishes for promoting the heresy of modernism around the world. The AUSCP is associated with heretic Father Richard Rohr, who promotes ecumenicism from his Center for Action and Contemplation. This is all made possible by the protection of at least 2 influential American bishops, Archbishop John Wester, who serves as the AUSCP's Episcopal moderator, and Cardinal Blaise Cupich, who opened his diocese to the AUSCP while expressing his support for their mission. I call this group heretical because they are known to mask their intentions of working towards the full ordination of women behind a veneer of mere progressivism and political Catholicism. But their past actions reveal the truth. The AUSCP has in the past hosted dissident priests like Father Helmut Schuler in 2013, who is the head of Austria's dissident Pfafar initiative, which, according to an interview he gave to the National Catholic Reporter that I am pulling from the Lepanto article, Schuler has been the leader of more than 400 priests and deacons who issued an appeal to disobedience in 2011, calling for, among other things, the admission of women and married people into the Catholic priesthood. This statement went beyond mere words. The group announced it would actually implement changes often forbidden in Catholic churches, such as allowing laypersons to preach, giving communion to the divorced and remarried, or those of other Catholic churches, and giving laypeople a large role in running local parishes. Moreover, they are outspoken proponents for allowing married men and women into the priesthood and for the San Francisco lifestyle rights. The speaking tour was publicly sponsored by a number of dissident and heretical organizations, but most notably was sponsored by the AUSCP. The AUSCP has allied itself with a number of censured and defrocked priests who all pushed for the ordination of women, which has been repeatedly and infallibly rejected by the papacy. Interestingly enough, as 1 Peter 5 has reported on this story, this plays perfectly into the historical Catholic prophecies of Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich. I will be covering that in detail in the coming days. Suffice it to say, all this was seen coming from a long ways back, and this should surprise no one. Finally, our third story comes from the Sedevacantist site Novus Ordo Watch, who reports that a Jesuit priest, and I use that term loosely, one Father Mario Serrano, has been openly advocating for the legal killing of babies in the Dominican Republic. One wonders what either St. Dominic or St. Ignatius of Loyola would say to this supposed priest if they could. In various social media posts, Father Serrano has called for the laity to support women marching for the right to murder babies. On Twitter, this degenerate stated, "Walking today for the decriminalization of aborto 3 causales, abortion, means being very close to the Jesus who loves, accompanies, and does not condemn people in extreme situations. I accompany you with my prayers for Tajabon." No word yet if this bishop or if the Vatican will strip him of his faculties for aligning himself with great evil. I won't hold my breath, though. Is anyone else tired yet of the gospel of accompaniment? If you like content that actually respects the traditional teachings of the Catholic Church, or are curious about traditional Catholicism and don't want to be bombarded by leftist modernist nonsense, please like this video and subscribe. You can follow me on various social media with links in the description. Dominus Vobiscum.